Hope you slept well. Slept like a log. Just out. It was nice. Yesterday was a busy day. Lots of work online. Lots of kind of really focused efforts around leadership and making sure people are kind of feeling included and, just looking out for other people, I'll never forget the first time my dad introduced me to the concept of servant leadership. We were at a cabin for a family vacation. The whole family was there, and my parents were talking about their wills and their dying wishes. And this was part of a conversation that we had. This was before my mom got ALS. It was a part of a conversation that we had around talking about our dying wishes. And they were talking about their dying wishes. And there are, a series of questions that you ask, you answer, and from those answers, you have a conversation with your family about, these issues around the dying experience. And, how little did I know at the time that this would be very, very kind of poignant in our lives, because I think it would be about maybe 3 years later that my mom was diagnosed with ALS. Anyway, in that conversation, my dad talked about how he wanted to be remembered as a servant leader. And he felt very strongly about that. That really stood out for him. And the idea is that, the leadership role is not to aggrandize yourself. The leadership role is to support the success of others, and that's what you do. And so you serve others by leading them. And that really stood out for me because I really like that idea of serving others by leading them. And that's I think, the kind of person I've become. And yesterday was a lot of servant leadership, serving other people, helping them kind of break through armor and get to places that they kind of didn't think that they could get to. So that was yesterday, and it's tiring. It's the kind of tiring where at the end of the day, you feel good tired. And it's interesting. It's different from the military tired, where by the end of the day in the military, I would be bone tired. My body would just be dead. But last night, my fatigue was intellectual. It's like my heart and my mind felt tired and quiet. So like when I turned the lights off last night, it was just out. So all this brings me to Rahul Narang, MD, Dr. Narang. Rahul is a guy I knew in college. He was a member of the fraternity. And, it's always interesting, this fraternity element. I'm a huge supporter of fraternities with all their flaws. And Rahul was a guy who came in, I think he came in after maybe a year or two after I was inducted into the fraternity. And he was a quiet but confident guy. He just handled it, right? He just handled the BS, and he was able to get it done. And he was just a good dude. You could count on Rahul. Like, there was no it's just pretty evident you could count on Rahul, and that was just cool. And so anyway, when the next story I heard about Rahul after I graduated, and I really didn't think much about him. I just remembered him. This next story I heard about Rahul was from another fraternity member, this guy named, why is his name escaping me? Justin. Yeah, this guy named Justin. So Justin was in New York. Justin got COVID early on in the pandemic. And his experience was really, really, really tough. I mean, it was touch and go for weeks. I think he almost died a couple times. He was on all the ventilators. Like, he was one of the early COVID victims that had to go through the process without us knowing what we know now. So he was in really dire straits. So in the podcast I'll post later today with Rahul talks about how the doctor-patient relationship had to be completely shut down. The patient was inside of essentially a cell of medical equipment, and you couldn't go in unless you had full equipment on. And so people were just kind of in these little isolation spaces, and they were just by themselves. And in those early days, it was probably just so spiritually depleting to see this. Well, anyway, that was Justin, right? So Justin was in a situation like this, and he was in New York. And the story goes that Justin's like on his deathbed, and out of nowhere, this guy comes in and slips him our secret handshake, and like it boosted his spirits a little bit, and it was like one of those things where Rahul's a surgeon now, right? So Rahul's like a general, right? Surgeons are like generals, right? So they roll in there, and there's this entire structure that's there to support this procedure. And Rahul's the orchestrator of that procedure. Like, Rahul's a badass now. I guess he was a badass back then too. We just didn't realize it. So anyway, he stopped doing his surgery stuff in order to support our fellow fraternity brother, and he got in there and he slipped him the secret handshake, and it had a little boost, it helped him out a little bit, and it's funny that he tells a story in the podcast about how that handshake helped him out. And so I know there's a lot of flaws in fraternities, but there's a lot to be said about a fraternity and its value over your lifetime. So anyway, I'll be talking about Rahul, and today I want to finish. I'm going to dedicate Fourth Bell to Rahul. So thank you, Rahul. It was cool talking to you. I'm excited to share your interview, and fast and firm, man. All right. So start to slow yourself down. One of the things I notice when I kind of consciously start to slow myself down is I can feel the air moving. So one way to slow down is to feel movement and then move it slower. So the movement of breath, slow that down. The movement of your hands, just your gestures, just start to slow down a little bit. Open your senses. Just focus on sound. Shut my eyes. You can do the same. Notice location of sound. Notice the silence around sound. The silence in corners, the silence of space itself. Sound comes out of silence. So study the space of silence around the sound. Maybe shift a sense of touch, noticing the sensation of temperature, parts of your body that may be warmer than others. Notice any taste or experience in your mouth. And lastly, just check in with your sense of smell. Is there any little hint of smell that you maybe didn't notice before, or maybe it's just kind of empty, like sound and silence and smell and no smell? Notice your ground. Notice what's beneath you. Notice the pelvis, base of the spine. Core. Heart space, shoulder blades. Just notice the torso. You can feel the whole torso and the bulk of your body. Throat. Top of the head. Come to the face. Soften the eyebrows. Soften behind the eyes. Soften the nose. Cheeks. Mouth. Put a little smile on there. Let's go to third bell. Just notice your breathing as it is. See if you can notice its location. Now for 3 rounds, get really big. So really breathe in really big for 3 rounds. And then come back to just watching your breath. Notice any changes in its location, intensity, direction, depth, and size. The breath is always changing. Let's change intensity. I want you to breathe in really fast with your nose and breathe out hard with your mouth. 3 times, and then we'll re-examine. What do you notice? My breath moved way up. I've got a lot of sensation in my nasal cavity from the breath in. I can feel my breath moving up higher up in my chest now. Let's finish out with 3 rounds of long, smooth, even breaths. We'll move on to 4th bell. Just picture your typical doctor. Picture the lab coat. Picture that doctor's coat. Now, put a face mask on it. Put a big respirator mask on it. Put one of those face shields. Add gloves and booties and things that cover the neck. Just cover the whole body. And then picture a room that's isolated, that's all walled off, lots of glass so you can see through, lots of equipment, lots of wires, lots of lights, lots of dials, lots of bags, lots of bedding, lots of tubes. Just imagine someone laying in bed, unconscious, connected to all those tubes. And just imagine a feeling of fear, a feeling of uncertainty, of doubt, of worry. A room filled with an invisible enemy that you're not sure is able to break through your protective gear or what. You just don't know anything about it. But because you're someone who's willing to go into that space, and that's your job, you go into it anyway. That's Rahul. And so as you imagine that experience, you can imagine the challenge, the fear, so you can offer gratitude for the courage that people like Rahul and Rahul himself portrayed to go into those spots, to go into those places. No one else was going to do it, so they had to do it, and they did it. And however you've articulated your gratitude, shift it a little bit to compassion and just reach out in your mind and with your heart to all the medical personnel who may really be struggling with kind of the huge shifts and changes that COVID has created in their lives. Maybe there's, some challenges that they're facing with kind of dealing with the post-traumatic stress of these really tricky situations, maybe having patients die or seeing bodies pile up in these trailers. Just offer a moment of compassion for that kind of difficulty that they've been required to endure. When you're ready to finish your practice, take 2 breaths, and the second exhale finishes it off. All right, I'm going to post Rahul's podcast later today, and I'll send both Rahul and Nico Gonzalez. I'll send out both their podcasts in a mass email. So I hope you have a great rest of your day. It's almost the end of the week, which is nice, and we'll see you tomorrow. Later on, we're done.